Always true.
Francesca Albanese, United Nations Special Rapporteur for the Palestinian territories. Thank you so much for joining us. So your mandate has been reconfirmed recently for another 3-year term. Despite a lot of pressure, which we'll get into in a moment, you've certainly been vocal in your first 3 years. You've issued many reports, many findings. What will be different in the next 3 years, especially when it comes to enforcing action to try and address some of the issues which you've highlighted?
Yes, indeed. Thanks for having me. The last weeks have attracted much attention toward my mandate, yet for another reason, which is deflection. Let's deflect the attention from where it should be, namely the catastrophe that Israel has created in the occupied Palestinian territory, primarily in Gaza. My mandate has been confirmed because, yes, there was pressure, but much of noise was outside the Human Rights Council. In the Human Rights Council, the president and the members of the Human Rights Council were fine with the findings that there have been non-persistent breaches of the code of conduct on my part, as many corners prompted by pro-Israeli groups were claiming. Look, I know that I've been vocal, but because the circumstances have so required, since the beginning of my mandate, I've witnessed the killing of journalists, starting with Shireen Abu Akleh, your colleague, and escalating violence against the Palestinian communities in the occupied West Bank by settlers and the army alike. Attacks on worshippers, real pogroms on Palestinian villages, the crumbling of the possibility to restore peace. And we've seen also advancement at the international justice level. But what's more important is that after the horrible events of October 7, which killed numerous Israeli civilians and others, and Israeli hostages were captured, then we have seen Israel unleashing a genocidal war on Gaza. This is what I've bore witness to, and I was vocal, but I will continue to do the same. I will remain vocal, and I intend to work more closely with the actors that are needed to ensure enforcement of international law, because the problem today is not the lack of normative framework, it's the lack of enforcement mechanisms. And because
so let me jump in, Francesca. How will, in your second term, will you be able to maybe enforce that normative framework of international law you're talking about?
Yeah, of course, it will not be me personally, but I already started working with and advocating for greater response at the domestic level vis-à-vis the injustice that has enveloped Palestine. Because, you know, when the law is violated, courts have to step in, and the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory is so grave, so serious. The illegality is so profound that it's not just the responsibility of the International Court of Justice or the ICC, the International Criminal Court, to intervene. I mean, they have intervened this year, and still states authorities do not comply. This is why I say justice for Palestine starts at home.
You mentioned that there was a finding that you were compliant with your mandate. So should we understand from that there was an investigation that basically cleared you from some of the allegations of your detractors that you were not compliant in your mandate?
Oh, yeah, there was. It's not technically an investigation, but yet there are oversight mechanisms inside the United Nations for special procedures. And there has been not one, but dozens of proceedings initiated against me by the State of Israel and its acolytes. Primarily, there are a number of actors inside the Human Rights Council, NGOs with ECOSOC status, starting complaints over and over. And then they start the complaint, and they use it as an evidence, according to their poor legal skills, that there is a wrongdoing on my side. But all these facts, all these allegations have been dealt with and presented to the Human Rights Council. The president was, examined those and concluded that there was no issue to continue giving oxygen to these claims.
You mentioned that there was pressure on members, I think, of the Human Rights Council. What exactly was the pressure? Who was it coming from? Were threats made?
Yeah, of course there were threats made against...
By who, Francesca?
There are different... pro-Israel groups are very active in each country. This is no secret. And they have been able to scare many into silence.
I understand that, but Francesca, can you explain any specific threats that were made, perhaps to members of the Human Rights Council, not to renew your mandate?
I know that there is pressure on member states in the Netherlands, in the United States. It's not even pressure. There are lobby groups. So yes, it's pressure, but it's different from the threats that I received. There is a collision of interests or a conjuncture of interest. And of course, there have been parliamentarians in France, in the Netherlands, in the United States, writing letters complaining about my conduct. Was there a point when you thought maybe your mandate will not be reconfirmed or renewed? Oh, yes. Yes, of course.
How did that make you feel?
No, I felt as I normally feel. I feel depleted by the genocide. The rest, people shouldn't think that I take this mandate with a light heart. It's heavy, it's voluntary, it's draining me and everyone who works with me, or who lives with me, the team of volunteers, the people in the UN, and my own family and circles of friends. My life has been completely transformed by the genocide. This is the problem. So when I saw that there was that turmoil at the very end of the Human Rights Council, I said, okay, so there is a plot to bring my mandate to an end. And I said, if I don't have the trust of the Human Rights Council, it's a fact. And so they should choose another person. But if they maintain me in this post, it's because it means that they trust me. And in this respect, they have to protect me and my functions.
Let me read to you what the US mission to the United Nations posted on X on April the 3rd. Quote, today, the US sent Secretary General Antonio Guterres a letter opposing Francesca Albanese's renewal as UN Special Rapporteur. We condemn her virulent anti-Semitism, which demonizes Israel and supports Hamas. She has clearly violated the UN's code of conduct and is unfit for her role. Her reappointment would show the UN tolerates anti-Semitic hatred and support for terrorism. What do you say to those accusations? Have you ever justified terrorism, the harming of civilians, even Israeli civilians, to be clear?
Absolutely not. Never done, never done, and I stand firmly against any form of harm, prejudice, hatred against anyone, especially civilians. I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm a human rights advocate. Of course, I stand against violence. Of course, I've condemned the attack on civilian life, in Israel on October 7. I've asked for justice for the victims and for the families of the hostages.
What about the allegations that you're anti-Semitic? Let me get you to speak to particularly a 2014 Facebook post referencing how America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. How do you respond to that?
It was an infelicitous choice of words, because what I meant is that I was referring to the influence of the AIPAC. And in fact, what I know today is that the pressure groups are very active in the US have different components and different origins. There are many Christian Zionists and others a part of these pressure groups. Or, now I'm working on a report that is also revealing how much of financial and economic interests are tied to the occupation. So my mind becomes more and more open. So yes, I used infelicitous words over 10 years ago, never used these words during my mandate. I clarified this, and I need to say that anti-Semitism is hatred of the Jews as Jews, and this is absolutely remote and far away from me. And the point is, I know how much anti-Semitism is weaponized and instrumentalized to silence and harm critical voices to Israel. This is a tactic of deflection, like others, then again, distract from the responsibilities of Israel and keep on putting the blame on the victims.
The fact that your mandate was confirmed, do you look at that as really an example of the world rejecting the position and the demands from the US and Israel, finding them not credible, particularly an accusation that a UN Special Rapporteur supports terrorism? Is that harming the credibility of those who make the allegations?
Yes, and I don't think those who make these allegations are very concerned with their reputation. Otherwise, they would not support the commission of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possibly genocide. But the root cause is the violence that is being unleashed against the Palestinians, and increasingly so against the Israelis who stand against the genocide, apartheid, and occupation. We shall not forget them. And this is systemic. It's part of our society. It cannot exist without consequences for all of us. And we are seeing it with the repression that happens, including in other places outside of Palestine, including in Europe, in France, in Italy, in Germany. No one is free until everyone is free. This is true.
And talking about the suffering, then in the last few days, we've heard from the World Food Programme, we've heard from Oxfam and other agencies saying they've run out of food in Gaza. Are there any circumstances under which an occupying power has the right to completely withhold the basic essentials of life from a civilian population?
Absolutely not. This is absolutely against the law. No one can withhold humanitarian assistance and basic necessities from anyone, especially in a situation of conflict. This is why I use the term abomination, because this is of an unprecedented proportion. But also, let's be mindful of the terms we use. It's not that Gaza is running out of food. Israel is intentionally starving the population in Gaza, and Israeli politicians are saying that on TV, without any sense of restraint or shame.
What about the Israeli line on that, well, the aid is being stolen, they say, by Hamas and armed groups, and therefore they can't allow any aid in because of that? Is that a justification?
Well, this is a justification that could be used in any situation of emergency, and still doesn't absolve the occupying power from its responsibility under international humanitarian law to provide all the humanitarian support that is needed, including shelter, medication, medical facilities, food, water, electricity, and so on and so forth. So no, Israel is committing serious crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity, because its violations of the law of wars have also another aspect: impact in a widespread and systemic fashion the civilian population. And if you link all these dots, you see that there is a thread, a pattern. The scale and the nature of assault reveals the intent to destroy the Palestinian as such. And it's not something that does not happen. It has happened already. It must be stopped and it must be punished.
Advocates of the Israeli line would say that we often hear hospitals are on the brink of closure, parts of Gaza are on the brink of famine or starvation, and we hear this repeatedly. They would suggest there is exaggeration here. What do you say to that?
Let journalists in. Let journalists, UN personnel, diplomats and others in. And let's see what has happened and what is happening into Gaza. Let's see who's exaggerating what.
All right, I want to play now a statement by the US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. Let's listen in to what he had to say about this policy.
This past weekend, Dr. Hanan Balki, who is the regional coordinator for the WHO for the Eastern Mediterranean region, called upon me to put more pressure on Israel to bring humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. I appreciate the message from Dr. Balke. And today, what I would like to suggest is that we work together on putting the pressure where it really belongs, on Hamas, to give us the opportunity to open up those humanitarian channels. So we call upon Hamas to sign an agreement so that humanitarian aid can flow into Gaza to the people who desperately need it.
When you hear words like that, does that sound like the US is endorsing a policy that it's legitimate to withhold aid from a civilian population until a certain political outcome is achieved?
The moment someone says that the current situation and the pressure that is put on the Palestinians, which is deadly, because not only they are starved and deprived of essential supplies, they are after 17 months of violent genocidal attack, but they continue to be bombed, they continue to be slaughtered, turned into smithereens. You know, you see the cruelty of all this, and there is nothing that can be justified by achieving a political gain. This is
right. I understand, Francesca, the problem could be stopped, but words do matter, right? We know from the campaign against you that words do matter. When you have a senior member of the United States, one of the great powers of the world, speaking like that, where does that sit vis-a-vis international law, in your understanding?
Complicity. In one word, it's complicity. This is something that existed and was pointed at by US organizations, US intellectuals, academics, and others, that even the previous administration was to be found complicit with the crimes that Israel was committing, were crimes against humanity and possibly genocide. And now, with the new administration, that those policies have become explicited. I mean, when you have a US president presenting something like the Gaza Riviera plan, what comes to my mind as a lawyer is that, this is the moment where the forcible transfer of the Palestinian becomes officially part of the US foreign policy. It's absolutely unbelievable, the hubris and the obliviousness about international law, but they say that they don't care. They don't care about it. The US is not respecting international law. It knows it, and it doesn't mind.
Are we seeing that circle of complicity widen? We've seen recently Hungary receive the Israeli prime minister, who we know is wanted as a war crime suspect, according to an arrest warrant issued by the ICC. Did Hungary violate its obligations to the ICC by failing to detain him?
Yes, Hungary violated its obligations under the Rome Statute. To your question, is the circle of complicity expanding, growing? Certainly is not shrinking. We shall recognize that the world is not made of the global minority, meaning the global north only. It's made of countries who have taken steps courageously, because no one is immune from the fury of the big powers, but they have taken steps from Latin America to Asia to Africa to counter the violations, the systematic violation of international law and the culture of impunity. But of course, more is to be done. And as a European, what I want and what I expect is that European leaders straighten their back and move from silence to action, or from words to action.
The ICJ is also now considering whether Israel's decision to ban all cooperation with UNRWA is a violation of the UN Charter. Is it?
Absolutely, I think so. It's a violation of the UN administrative law, because UNRWA is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly. It's not a program whatsoever. It is established in the UN law, and its functioning, its existence, its conditioned upon the resolution of the question of Palestine and Palestinian refugees, that UNRWA serves. But also hitting UNRWA so hardly as Israel has been doing since since ever, but particularly since October 2023. It's something that is functional to the demise of Palestinians' existence in the occupied Palestinian territory, because UNRWA is part and parcel of Palestinian refugee life through schools and through the maintenance of the archives, but also is the only body today that has the capillarity to provide assistance to Palestinian refugees in a way that doesn't create gaps and discontinuity.
Francesca, what would you say to the Israeli argument that actually Israel is not obliged to deal with UNRWA per se, it has the legal right to determine who operates in its territory, and it could deal with other agencies as long as it respects its legal obligations towards the occupied people?
Look, to an extent, I would agree with the fact that Israel doesn't have necessarily to work with UNRWA. If Israel gives the possibility to the Palestinians to enjoy their right of self-determination, Israel has no right to make any determination that concerns the life of millions of Palestinians living in Gaza, in the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And let me remind you, because you keep on starting with the line of what Israel says, which frankly makes no sense to me. But the International Court of Justice has declared what we knew already, that the occupation that Israel maintains in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank and East Jerusalem is unlawful and must be ended totally and unconditionally. This is what the only thing that Israel can do in Palestine. It's to withdraw its presence. The rest is just giving air to Israel as an unlawful occupying power.
Yeah, we do have to present to you the Israeli line just to give the viewers the benefit of hearing your analysis and reaction to it. So we appreciate you engaging with those questions. I'm glad you raised the issue of the July 2024 ICJ finding that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory is illegal. We've heard on April 27th from the Israeli Prime Minister, his speech to the Jewish News Syndicate conference, that the occupation of Gaza will continue. He's vowing to continue it. I guess in the minds of many viewers, they might be asking, there obviously is little enforceability and there is little concern about conforming with these court rulings on the part of Israeli leaders. How do you make all these court orders actually enforceable?
Yeah, I agree that this is what appears at the state level. There has been little enforcement, not enforceability. But let's also look at what's happening around the world. Never before there has been a global movement of protest against not just Israel or the United States. In each state, there are protests against governments and against the military industry and even partnership that universities have with Israel. So the world, in a way, is in turmoil. Of course, more is to be done, but also look at the repression that has been unleashed by many countries, including so-called Western democracies, in order to curb the opposition to Israel's abuses.
Oh, precisely on that point, I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple of questions here about your recent trip to Germany in February. We know that a couple of your appearances at German universities were cancelled.
First of all, the university talks in Munich and Berlin were cancelled. Other cultural venues that were hosting events where I would appear alongside with Eyal Weizmann and others were forced to withdraw the use of the venue. So there was a huge pressure. Where it comes from, the Israeli ambassador in Germany, the police who even threatened to arrest me. The UN had to intervene, reminding Germany of the scandalous posture they were taking, because as a special rapporteur, I have diplomatic immunity. But also,
can I get you to elaborate on that? Did you receive some kind of official threat from the police that they may arrest you, and on what grounds?
Well, as I arrived in Berlin, the lawyer of an organization that had invited me and met with me informed me that the police had communicated to them their intention to arrest me for some of my statements, the problematic statements included the fact that Germany had committed 2 genocides in the span of 30 years, the one in Namibia against the Herero and Nama populations, and of course the genocide of the Jewish people, the Roma and Sinti, and others, including disabled people in Europe. So this was, according to the police, to the ears of the police, trivializing the Holocaust, because of course in Germany there is only one and one only genocide. Of course I was not trivializing. As a European, I bring the Holocaust as a vivid memory of the monstrosity that we can become, and I don't want anything like that happening today. This is why for me also as a person, what's happening in Gaza is unacceptable. But then the other thing is that I mentioned from the river to the sea, which is something for which you can be arrested. I was simply describing the geography of the land between the river, which is under Israeli control, either because it's Israel's territory or because it's occupied territory. And it is from the river to the sea. And this was enough to trigger the sensitivity of the Israeli embassy and its acolytes, wherever they are.
So you managed to avoid getting arrested, but I understand that one of the events that took place, the police had a very heavy presence and they had translators present. Is that your understanding? And how did that make you feel? Did you feel threatened that at any moment perhaps you could be dragged off the stage?
Yeah, of course, of course. This was the first time that where I really found myself outside of my comfort zone. Let me tell you, when I was told, if you appear on podium again, you will be arrested. And I said, what shall I do? Shall I just go home? Shall I stay quiet and let the events cancelled and not rescheduled? And then after a tormentous night, I said, no, I will be there. I will be there and I will face the consequences because it's unacceptable. We are beyond the absurd. And of course, some venues...
Who made that threat to you? If you appear on the podium again, you're going to be arrested. Who made that threat to you?
Again, you have to understand that I was not served a notice. So I had said these words on a podium in Munich at the conference on peace, which was handing side by side to the conference on security. So there was a peace conference and a security conference. And then from Munich, where a university lecture was cancelled and then was hosted in a refugee shelter in a beautiful place, but where refugees are assisted, because this was the only place in Munich where we were welcome, the students, the academics who organized it, and myself. Then when I went to Berlin after the first meetings, I was told, look, the police is after you, and they think that they say that if you speak again about this, you will be arrested. And so I said, okay, let me think about it. Okay, I will go. And then, of course, the events were rescheduled in other places by the German organizations. Look, there are many Germans who do not want to live with this shame on themselves, who are against it. But of course, there is also a huge cultural guilt syndrome that pushes people away from nationality. The very possibility that they put themselves in a critical position toward Israel is something that makes many people's brains in Germany shut down. And this is what I have experienced. But it didn't stop me, and it didn't stop the others. And this is why I kept on saying, even if it's heavy, we must continue to hold the ground, because we have already lost so much in terms of human rights protection and possibility to exercise our fundamental freedoms.
Francesca Albanese, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Palestinian territories, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thanks for having me.